Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we are going to be tackling something that's probably impacting you already. Layoffs in the freight industry. You sent over this Freight Waves article, and wow, it's over 16,900 jobs gone since October. We're talking big names. Amazon, Kohl's, even Del Monte Foods. So what's the story here? Why is this happening? And what does it mean for all of us?
Yeah, it's definitely noteworthy, even in an industry known for its ups and downs. Let's get some perspective on that 16,900 number. The freight industry is cyclical, meaning it's closely tied to the overall economy. When the economy is strong, demand for goods is high, and the freight industry thrives. But when the economy weakens, demand drops, and that's when we often see layoffs.
So this could be a sign of a bigger economic slowdown, people tightening their belts and buying less stuff.
That's certainly one piece of the puzzle, but there's more to it than just a general economic downturn. We're seeing shifts in consumer behavior, advancements in technology, and global events all playing a role.
Okay, let's unpack that. Where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with Amazon. They're shutting down all 7 of their fulfillment centers in Quebec. That's a loss of 2,000 direct jobs, plus another 2,500 delivery partners. But here's the twist. They're not abandoning Quebec entirely. They're switching to a subcontractor model for deliveries, claiming it will save customers money.
So instead of having their own employees deliver packages, they're outsourcing to other companies, basically.
Exactly. And this move by Amazon reflects a broader trend we're seeing in the industry, a shift towards the gig economy. More and more companies are relying on independent contractors and freelancers for delivery and logistics services.
And what does that mean for those workers? Are they getting a fair shake?
That's a critical question. The gig economy offers flexibility for some workers, but it also comes with challenges. Gig workers often lack the same benefits and protections as traditional employees. They might face unpredictable income, limited access to health care, and less job security.
So while this subcontracting model might save Amazon money and potentially even lower prices for consumers, it could come at a cost for the workers on the ground. It's a complicated trade-off for sure.
Absolutely. And this trend towards the gig economy in the freight industry is something we need to watch closely. It raises important questions about worker rights, labor regulations, and the future of employment in the sector.
Let's shift gears to another big player in the news, Kohl's. They're closing a distribution warehouse in California, leading to 690 job losses. The article mentions this is part of Kohl's strategy to close underperforming stores and boost efficiency.
And this situation connects to a bigger trend we're seeing in retail. Consumers are increasingly shopping online, which puts pressure on traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Kohl's isn't alone in this struggle. Many retailers are having to adapt to changing consumer habits, and that often means streamlining operations, closing stores. And yes, sometimes laying off workers.
So we've got Amazon embracing the gig economy, Kohl's downsizing in the face of online shopping. It sounds like the freight industry is in the middle of a major transformation.
It certainly is. And these changes are being driven by a complex interplay of factors: economic conditions, technological advancements, shifting consumer preferences, and global events, to name just a few.
Speaking of other factors, let's dive into a few more examples from the article. Del Monte Foods is closing a tomato production site and cannery, resulting in 378 jobs lost. This caught my eye because it seems like a completely different sector of the freight industry.
It is, but it's still connected. The food production industry relies heavily on transportation and logistics to get their products from farms to processing plants to stores and ultimately to our tables. And any disruption in the freight industry, whether it's a shortage of truck drivers or increased transportation costs, can have a ripple effect throughout the food supply chain.
So even if a company isn't directly involved in trucking or shipping, they can still be vulnerable to these industry-wide shifts. It's like a domino effect.
Precisely. And the Del Monte example highlights how interconnected various sectors are within the freight ecosystem. What happens in one part of the system can have far-reaching consequences.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. We've got economic slowdowns, the rise of e-commerce, and now we're adding global events to the mix. It's a lot to take in.
It is, and these factors often intertwine in unexpected ways. Take the pandemic, for example. It led to a surge in online shopping, which strained the freight industry's capacity. Then we had supply chain disruptions caused by lockdowns and port closures, further exacerbating the situation.
And now we're seeing the aftershocks of all that, with companies adjusting to a new normal that's still evolving. It's a bit like trying to hit a moving target.
That's a good analogy. The freight industry is incredibly dynamic, and companies are constantly having to adapt to changing conditions. Sometimes that means making tough decisions like reducing their workforce.
Let's talk more about those tough decisions. The article lists a whole bunch of other companies making layoffs, and I'm starting to see some patterns emerge. We've got packaging companies like Grief and Orbis Corp cutting jobs. Then there's Fila, the shoe and apparel maker, downsizing its North American operations.
What's fascinating here is that these companies are not directly involved in transportation or logistics, yet they're still feeling the pinch. It underscores how interconnected the freight industry is with the rest of the economy.
Right, so even if a company doesn't own trucks or ships, they still rely on a functioning freight network to get their products to market. It's a ripple effect, like we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. When transportation costs rise or there are delays in the supply chain, those costs are often passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices or limited product availability.
So these layoffs could end up hitting our wallets in more ways than one. That brings us to the big question. What does all of this mean for us, the consumers?
That's the crux of it, isn't it? We've explored the why behind these layoffs,
Mhm.
but now we need to understand that how these changes in the freight industry might impact our everyday lives.
I think we can all relate to this on some level. We've all experienced those frustrating delivery delays or seen prices creep up at the grocery store. Are we talking about more of the same but amplified?
It's certainly a possibility. When transportation companies have to cut back, it can create bottlenecks in the supply chain. Fewer truck drivers on the road can mean longer wait times for deliveries. And if there are fewer warehouse workers to process orders, that can further compound the delays.
So that online order that used to arrive in 2 days might now take a week or more. And that's assuming the product is even in stock.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the potential impact on prices. When transportation costs go up, companies often have to pass those increases along to consumers.
So we could be looking at a double whammy of longer wait times and higher prices. It's not a very cheerful prospect.
It's not. But there are also potential silver linings. These challenges could force companies to become more innovative and efficient. We might see a greater emphasis on optimizing logistics, reducing waste, and finding creative solutions to supply chain problems.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. There could be some positive outcomes that emerge from this upheaval.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Necessity is often the mother of invention, as they say. And I believe we'll see some ingenuity and resilience from the freight industry as it navigates these turbulent waters.
That's reassuring. But in the meantime, what can we as consumers do to prepare for these potential disruptions? It feels like we're at the mercy of these larger forces.
To some extent, we are. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. The key is to be informed and proactive. Staying up to date on industry news and trends like we're doing right now can help you anticipate potential issues.
So keeping an ear to the ground is a good first step. But what about those everyday decisions like grocery shopping or ordering things online? Are there any practical tips you can offer?
Absolutely. When it comes to shopping, it's wise to be flexible. If you have specific items you need, especially if they're not readily available everywhere, consider ordering them in advance to avoid potential delays.
That makes sense. Don't wait until the last minute if you can help it. What else?
Don't be afraid to explore alternatives. If your go-to brand is experiencing supply chain issues, be open to trying a different brand or product. You might discover something new that you love.
That's a good reminder. We can get stuck in our routines and forget that there are often other options out there.
And perhaps most importantly, be patient. We're all in this together, and it's important to remember that everyone is doing their best to navigate these challenges.
Patience is definitely a virtue, especially these days. Now, I want to touch on a few more examples from the article that I found intriguing. We haven't talked much about the impact of automation yet.
You're right, we haven't, and it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. The article mentions Lutex, a company that provides telematics and in-cab camera systems, conducting layoffs.
I remember that one. It seemed a bit ironic that a company focused on improving safety and efficiency in the transportation sector was also cutting jobs.
It does highlight the complexities of technological advancement. While automation can lead to greater efficiency and productivity, it can also displace human workers. It's a double-edged sword, and the freight industry is grappling with how to best utilize these new technologies while also addressing the human impact.
So it's not as simple as saying robots are taking our jobs. It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance between technological innovation and human well-being. And that's a conversation that's happening across many industries, not just in the freight sector.
This brings to mind another example from the article. Lineage, a cold storage warehouse operator, is closing a facility and laying off workers due to a slowdown in demand for cold storage space.
This example underscores the fact that the oversupply issue we mentioned earlier is particularly acute in certain segments of the freight industry. Not only are companies dealing with less demand overall, but they also have too much capacity in some areas.
So it's not just a matter of not enough trucks or drivers. It's also about having too much infrastructure in some cases.
Precisely. And this overcapacity can further exacerbate the problem of job losses. It's a vicious cycle. Less demand leads to overcapacity, which leads to layoffs, which further weakens the industry.
This is starting to feel a bit heavy. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's clear that the freight industry is facing some serious headwinds.
It is, but it's also important to remember that the freight industry is essential to our modern economy. It's the backbone of global trade, and it plays a vital role in getting the goods and services we rely on every day.
That's a good point. We often take for granted the complex logistics that go into delivering everything from our food to our clothes to the technology we use.
Exactly. And despite the challenges we've discussed, the freight industry is incredibly resilient and adaptable. I'm confident that it will find ways to innovate, overcome these obstacles, and continue to play its vital role in our globalized world.
That's a more optimistic note to end on. Before we wrap up, though, there's one last example from the article that I want to touch on.
Of course, which one did you have in mind?
It's the case of Scentsy the Candle Company. They're closing their shipping and distributing facility and laying off employees in Texas. What struck me about this example is that it shows how even a seemingly niche market like scented candles is reliant on a robust freight network.
It's a great illustration of how interconnected the global supply chain truly is.
Hmm.
Even a product as seemingly simple as a candle relies on a complex network of suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, and transportation providers to get from its point of origin to the consumer's hands.
And when there are disruptions in that network, whether it's due to labor shortages, increased costs, or geopolitical events, the effects can be felt far and wide.
Indeed. It's a reminder that we live in an increasingly interconnected world, and the decisions made in one part of the globe can have ripple effects that reach even the most seemingly isolated corners of the market.
It really drives home the point that we're all part of a larger system, and these seemingly isolated events are often connected in ways we might not immediately realize.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even in a globalized world, local decisions and actions can have a significant impact.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the wave of layoffs hitting the freight industry, what's the most important message you want our listeners to take away?
I'd say it's this: stay informed, be adaptable, and don't be afraid to ask questions. The more you understand about the forces shaping the world around you, the better equipped you'll be to navigate them. And who knows, you might even discover new opportunities along the way.
Beautifully said. That's a great note to end on. I think we've all learned a lot today, and it's given me a whole new perspective on something I used to take for granted.
I'm glad to hear that. That's the goal of the deep dive after all, to spark curiosity, encourage critical thinking, and help us all become more informed and engaged citizens.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of the deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic and share your own observations and thoughts. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep. It really drives home the point that we're all part of a larger system. And these seemingly isolated events are often connected in ways we might not immediately realize.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even in a globalized world, local decisions and actions can have a significant impact.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the wave of layoffs hitting the freight industry, what's the most important message you want our listeners to take away?
I'd say it's this: stay informed, be adaptable, and don't be afraid to ask questions. The more you understand about the forces shaping the world around you, the better equipped you'll be to navigate them. And who knows, you might even discover new opportunities along the way.
Beautifully said. That's a great note to end on. I think we've all learned a lot today, and it's given me a whole new perspective on something I used to take for granted.
I'm glad to hear that. That's the goal of the deep dive after all: to spark curiosity, encourage critical thinking, and help us all become more informed and engaged citizens.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic and share your own observations and thoughts. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.